Part 2. The weeks following the wedding brought absolutely no warmth or acceptance from the Carter family, and Daniel called his parents repeatedly. But each conversation ended in disappointment and frustration because Patricia would answer with clipped one-word responses and ask about Daniel's health and his work. But she never once mentioned Maya's name, and it was as if he had married a ghost that did not exist in their world. Patricia would ask how the apartment was doing, and Daniel would try to tell her that they were doing fine, and that Maya had been decorating their home, but his mother would interrupt him mid-sentence and redirect the conversation to ask if he had thought about that job opportunity at his father's friend's firm, and she would change the subject every single time he tried to mention his wife. Richard was even worse than Patricia because he rarely came to the phone at all, and when he did manage to pick up the conversations, were purely about practical matters, with no questions about Daniel's well-being or any interest in his life, and it was just brief exchanges that felt more like business transactions than father and son conversations. Daniel worked as a structural engineer at a mid-sized firm downtown, and his job was stable with a solid reputation, but the money was modest and nothing extravagant, and he and Maya shared a 2-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood that was comfortable but not fancy or impressive by any means. Maya had just completed her doctorate in astrophysics, and she was working as a researcher at a government facility that specialized in deep space communications, and her work was highly classified, which made it difficult to discuss with anyone, including Daniel, but he knew she was brilliant because he had seen her work through impossible equations and watched her present research papers that left seasoned scientists nodding in respect and admiration. One evening, about a month after the wedding, Daniel arrived home to find Maya sitting on their small balcony, staring up at the stars with her laptop beside her, and the screen was dark, and she held a mug of tea that had gone cold hours ago. Daniel stepped out onto the balcony and asked if she had a rough day at work. Maya said quietly that they had rejected her request again, and she seemed tired and defeated. Daniel asked if it was about the telescope time she had been requesting. Maya nodded and explained that she had been trying to get observation hours for 6 months, and every other researcher in her division got approved without any problems. But hers kept getting denied with no real explanation, and just vague statements about insufficient justification. Daniel sat beside her and took her hand and told her that was ridiculous because her proposal was solid. Maya said she knew it was solid, and then she turned to look at him, and he saw the exhaustion deep in her eyes, and she said that sometimes she wondered if it was worth fighting for recognition and fighting for respect and fighting just to do the work she was qualified to do. Daniel told her she was the best scientist in that entire facility. Maya corrected him and said she was the only black woman in that facility, and that seemed to matter more than her credentials or her qualifications or anything she had accomplished in her career. Daniel had no response to that statement because he wanted to tell her she was wrong, and that her skin color did not matter, and that merit was all that counted. But he had seen enough in the past month to know that would be a lie. And the world judged Maya before she even opened her mouth, and his own family was living proof of that fact. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he glanced at it and sighed with frustration. Maya asked if it was his mother calling again. Daniel said it was the family group chat, and they were planning Thanksgiving dinner. Maya asked if they were invited to join the family. Daniel read the message, and his jaw tightened, and he said that Maya was not mentioned anywhere in the message, and he was invited. But they were making it very clear it was for family only. Maya stood up and wrapped her arms around herself and told Daniel that he should go to Thanksgiving with his family. Daniel said he was not going anywhere without her. Maya told him they were his family and he should not have to choose. Daniel stood and took her shoulders gently and made her look at him and said that she was his family now and he did not care what his parents thought because he chose her and he would choose her every single day. Maya smiled sadly and said she knew he would, but he should not have to choose at all because a real family should be big enough for everyone. Over the following weeks, the pattern continued with the same cold rejection, and Daniel's colleagues would ask about his family and he would deflect the questions and invitations to Carter. Family events would arrive, but they were always addressed only to him with no mention of Maya, and his mother would call and speak briefly and hang up before he could mention Maya's name. Gregory sent a message suggesting that Daniel come by for drinks with just the brothers like old times. But when Daniel declined and suggested a couple's dinner instead, Gregory never responded to the message. The isolation from the Carter family was deliberate and complete, and it weighed on both of them. Maya threw herself into her work and spent long hours at the facility, and she came home exhausted with her brilliant mind turned toward problems that were light years away, rather than the prejudice she faced every single day, because it was easier to think about distant stars than nearby hatred. Daniel noticed that Maya had stopped talking about her day at work, and when he asked about her research, she would give vague answers and change the subject quickly. And the vibrant, passionate woman he had married was dimming under the weight of constant rejection. One Saturday morning, Daniel woke to find Maya already dressed and packing a small bag for a trip. Daniel asked where she was going and rubbed sleep from his eyes. Maya said she had a conference and she forgot to mention it, and she would be gone for 3 days in Houston. Daniel asked which conference it was. Maya zipped the bag quickly without meeting his eyes and said it was just a research symposium and nothing major. Daniel asked what was really going on because something felt wrong. Maya paused at the door with her hand on the knob, and for a moment Daniel thought she might tell him what was bothering her and let him help. But then she straightened her shoulders and looked back with a forced smile and said nothing was going on, and it was just work, and she would be back on Wednesday. She left before Daniel could press her for more information. Daniel spent that entire weekend in their apartment surrounded by the silence of Maya's absence, and he tried calling his parents again, hoping that maybe enough time had passed for them to soften their position. But Patricia answered and immediately said it was not a good time. Daniel said it was never a good time, and he asked when she was going to accept that Maya was his wife. Patricia said she did not know what Daniel wanted her to say. Daniel said he wanted her to say she would give Maya a chance and actually meet her as a person and not just judge her from across a room based on appearance. Patricia's voice went cold and she said they did meet Maya, and they saw exactly who she was. Daniel said they saw the color of her skin and decided that was enough information. Patricia told him not to dare accuse her of anything. Daniel asked her, of what exactly, because she was being exactly what he was accusing her of, and he was not blind to it. There was a long pause on the phone, and then Patricia spoke with measured, sharp words and said that Daniel was her son, and she loved him, but she would not pretend to support a decision that would only bring him hardship, and he had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. Patricia hung up the phone before Daniel could respond. Daniel sat on the couch staring at his phone and realized that his family was gone, and not dead, but lost to him nonetheless, and buried under layers of prejudice he had never fully seen when it was not directed at someone he loved. He thought about Maya alone at some conference, carrying the weight of her brilliance in a world that refused to see past her skin, and he thought about the life they were building together brick by brick, against a wind of contempt that never seemed to stop blowing, and he wondered how long they could keep building before they both collapsed from exhaustion. Part 3. 3 months after the wedding, Maya stopped trying to connect with the Carter family, and she no longer asked about them or suggested that Daniel reach out to them or pretended that their absence did not hurt her deeply, and she simply moved through life with quiet determination and focused on her work and on Daniel, and on building a life that did not include the Carters in any way. Daniel respected her choice even though guilt gnawed at him constantly because he had promised Maya a partnership and a team facing the world together. But instead, she was facing battles he could not fully understand, and his family had become another battlefield rather than a sanctuary or source of support. Work became Maya's only refuge from the pain, and she arrived at the research facility before dawn and left long after dark, and her colleagues knew her as dedicated and brilliant, but also increasingly isolated because she ate lunch alone and declined invitations to after-work gatherings and kept all her conversations strictly professional. Dr. Harold Bennett was the facility director, and he was a weathered man in his 60s with keen eyes that missed absolutely nothing, and he had noticed Maya's withdrawal from social interaction, and more importantly, he had noticed the way certain colleagues treated her with disrespect, and the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, and the research collaborations she was excluded from, and the subtle, constant undermining of her work. One Friday evening, he found Maya still in the lab at after 9 o'clock running calculations on a massive display screen. Dr. Bennett said her name and told her it was after 9. Maya did not look up from her work and said she was just finishing these projections. Dr. Bennett used her first name, which was rare, and he asked how long she was going to work herself to death. Maya said she was fine and kept working. Dr. Bennett pulled up a chair and sat beside her and said she was not fine at all because she was there 14 hours a day and she had lost weight, and she looked like she had not slept in a week, and he asked what was really going on with her. Maya's fingers stilled on the keyboard, and for a moment she considered brushing him off again and maintaining the professional distance that had become her armor. But she was so tired of carrying everything alone. Maya asked quietly if he knew how many research proposals she had submitted in the past 3 months. Dr. Bennett said he had seen them and counted 7 if he was remembering correctly. Maya said 7 proposals and all of them were rejected, and then she asked if he knew how many proposals Dr. Andrews had submitted. Dr. Bennett said he assumed she was about to tell him. Maya said Andrews submitted 5 proposals and all 5 were approved, and she turned to face Bennett and said that Andrews' work was good, and she was not questioning that, but hers was better, and they both knew it. Dr. Bennett leaned back in his chair with a carefully neutral expression and said that was a serious accusation. Maya said it was not an accusation but an observation, and she gestured to her screen and explained that she had been working on deep space signal analysis that could revolutionize how humanity communicated with distant probes, and she had developed algorithms that increased clarity by 40%, but she could not get funding to test them, while Andrews got budget approval for a project that was essentially redoing work that was done 5 years ago. Dr. Bennett asked if she had spoken to the review board about this. Maya laughed bitterly and said the review board was made up of 6 white men over 50, and yes, she had spoken to them, and they smiled and nodded and told her work showed promise, but needed more development, and then they funded projects that showed less promise and needed more development. Dr. Bennett was quiet for a long moment, and then he stood and moved to the window, looking out over the facility grounds, and asked how much Maya knew about the Deep Space Communications Project. Maya said she only knew rumors about the classified project and something about long-range experiments and potential contact scenarios. Dr. Bennett asked what she would say if he told her there was an opening on that team. Maya's heart skipped a beat because the Deep Space Communications Project was the most prestigious assignment at the entire facility, and scientists competed for years to get a position on that team. Maya said carefully that she would ask why he was telling her this. Dr. Bennett said he had recommended her for the position 2 months ago, and the decision-makers had finally agreed to give her a chance. But he needed to be honest with her, because she would be the only woman on a team of 12 and the only person of color on that team, and the work was intense and classified and under constant scrutiny. Maya asked when she could start. Dr. Bennett smiled and said Monday, but told her to take the weekend and rest and spend time with her husband, because she was going to need her strength. Maya drove home that night with the first genuine hope she had felt in months, and she found Daniel in the kitchen attempting to cook dinner, and something was burning badly. Maya called out that she was home and dropped her bag by the door. Daniel emerged from the kitchen waving a towel at the smoke detector and asked her to please tell him she knew how to make pasta that did not stick together into one giant blob. Maya laughed, and it was a real, genuine laugh for the first time in weeks, and she told him to move over and let the scientist handle the cooking. As they cooked together, Maya told Daniel about the new assignment, and she could not share classified details, but she conveyed her excitement and her renewed energy. And Daniel watched her come alive again as she gestured with a wooden spoon and explained the significance of deep space communications. Maya said this could be it, and this could be the project that made her entire career. Daniel pulled her into a hug and said he was so proud of her. They ate dinner on the balcony, watching the stars emerge as the sun set, and for the first time since the wedding. The conversation was easy and filled with plans and possibilities rather than weighed down by disappointments. Daniel's phone rang and Patricia's name appeared on the screen. Maya saw the name and told Daniel to answer it. Daniel said he did not want to ruin the evening. Maya said it was his mother and he should answer the phone. Daniel picked up reluctantly and said hello. Patricia said they were having a family dinner next Sunday and Richard insisted that Daniel come. Daniel asked if Maya was invited to the dinner. The pause that followed was answer enough. Daniel said then he was not coming. Patricia pleaded and said Richard wanted to discuss something important about Daniel's future. Daniel said his future included his wife. Patricia asked if he could just come alone just this once for his father. Daniel looked at Maya, who was pretending to focus on her food, but he saw the tension in her shoulders, and the way her smile had faded completely. Daniel said no, he could not come alone, and if they wanted to see him, then Maya had to come too. And those were the terms. Patricia's voice turned icy, and she said Daniel was choosing Maya over his family. Daniel said Maya was his family, and Patricia was choosing prejudice over her son, and he asked how that felt. Daniel hung up before Patricia could respond. Maya reached across the table and took his hand and said he did not have to fight them for her. Daniel said he was not fighting them for her, but fighting them because they were wrong, and besides, she was about to be a big-shot scientist and he needed to stay on her good side. Maya smiled, but it did not quite reach her eyes because they both knew the truth, and no matter what she accomplished or achieved, the Carter family would never see past her skin, and success would not change their minds, and awards would not soften their hearts, and she could unravel the secrets of the universe and they would still consider her unworthy. That night as they lay in bed, Maya stared at the ceiling. Maya said Daniel's name. Daniel responded. Maya asked what if it was always like this, and what if his family never came around. Daniel rolled over to face her and said then they would build their own family and fill their lives with people who saw her for who she was and create something better than what his parents were offering. Maya asked if he would really be okay with never talking to them again. Daniel said he would be okay with anything as long as he was with her. Maya wanted to believe him, but she had seen the pain in his eyes when he hung up on his mother, and she knew he was sacrificing for her, and the weight of that sacrifice was becoming unbearable. As Daniel fell asleep beside her, Maya made a quiet promise to herself and decided she would make the Deep Space Communications project a success and prove herself so completely and so undeniably that even the Carter family would have to acknowledge her worth. It was a naive hope born of desperation and exhaustion, but it was the only hope she had left. Part 4 Monday morning arrived with a crisp winter chill, and Maya dressed carefully in her most professional outfit, which was a navy suit that Daniel had bought her as a wedding gift, and she stood before the mirror adjusting her collar and steadying her nerves. Daniel came up behind her and kissed her cheek and told her she had this. Maya said it was just a job. Daniel said it was not just a job, but her job, and the one she had earned through hard work. Maya smiled at him in the mirror reflection and said she loved him. Daniel said he loved her too and told her to go show them what a real scientist looked like. The Deep Space Communications Lab was located in the most secure section of the facility, 3 levels below ground, and Maya had to pass through 4 security checkpoints, and each one required biometric scans and clearance verification. And the deeper she went, the quieter it became until the only sounds were the hum of ventilation systems and the soft echo of her footsteps. Dr. Harold Bennett met her at the lab entrance and asked if she was ready. Maya said she was as ready as she would ever be. Bennett opened the door to reveal a vast room filled with equipment that seemed to belong in a science fiction film, and massive displays showed streams of data from satellites and deep space probes and computer systems, lined the walls with their screens filled with complex equations and signal analyses, and at the center of it all was a holographic display projecting a 3-dimensional map of known space with countless signals represented as glowing points of light. 12 scientists looked up as Maya entered, and 12 sets of eyes studied her with expressions ranging from curious to skeptical, and all of them were clearly appraising the new team member. Dr. Bennett announced that this was Dr. Maya Williams, and she was joining the team as their new signal analysis specialist. A tall man in his 40s approached first with graying hair and thick glasses that magnified his eyes slightly, and he introduced himself as Chris Harrison and shook Maya's hand firmly and said he had read her work on signal degradation in deep space transmissions and called it impressive stuff. Maya thanked him. Others introduced themselves with names like Peter and Alan and David and Simon, and the names blurred together, but Maya noted their expressions carefully and cataloged who seemed welcoming and who seemed wary of her presence. Dr. Bennett guided Maya to a workstation and explained that they had been monitoring deep space signals for years and cataloging everything they received, and most of it was cosmic noise and natural phenomena, but they had isolated a recurring signal that did not fit any known natural pattern. Bennett pulled up a waveform on her screen, and Maya leaned in, immediately engaged by scientific curiosity, and the signal was complex and rhythmic with variations that seemed almost deliberate. Maya asked how long they had been tracking this signal. Bennett said 6 years, and it repeated every 11 days and originated from a region approximately 400 light-years away. Maya's breath caught, and she said that was not natural noise. Bennett agreed and said no, it was not. Maya spent the first week completely immersed in data, and she was barely aware of time passing as she analyzed the signal from every possible angle and broke it down into component frequencies and searched for patterns within patterns, and the other team members worked around her and occasionally offered input or asked questions, but largely left her to her analysis. Chris became an unlikely ally who brought her coffee and shared his own findings and seemed genuinely interested in her perspective, and during one late-night session, he pulled up a chair beside her workstation. Chris asked if she saw it too. Maya asked what he meant. Chris said the mathematical structure, and this was not random, and someone or something was sending this deliberately. Maya nodded slowly and said she had been afraid to say it out loud because it sounded crazy. Chris said 5 years ago he would have agreed with her, but the more they analyzed this signal, the clearer it became that they were looking at a signal from an intelligent source. Maya asked if he meant an alien civilization. Chris said that was the implication. Maya sat back with her mind racing, because everything she had worked for and everything she had studied had led to this moment, and the possibility of contact with extraterrestrial intelligence and the question that had driven humanity to look at the stars since the dawn of consciousness, and she was at the center of it all. Maya asked what the government knew about this. Chris admitted they knew more than they were telling the team, and this project was not just research but preparation, and they wanted to understand the signal and decode it if possible, before they decided how to proceed. Over the following weeks, Maya worked with an intensity that worried even Daniel, and she would come home exhausted with her mind still processing data and seeing waveforms in her sleep. But she was also alive in a way she had not been since the wedding, because the work mattered, and she mattered. Her breakthrough came on a Thursday night 3 weeks into her new assignment, when she was analyzing the signal's frequency modulations, and she noticed something the others had missed, and hidden within the primary signal were smaller variations that were almost imperceptible but created a secondary pattern. Maya called Chris across the lab and told him to come look at this. Chris rushed over, followed by several other team members, and Maya pulled up her analysis on the main display. Maya explained that they had been treating this as a single signal, but it was not, and it was layered, and the primary frequency was a carrier wave, but the real information was encoded in these micro-variations. She ran a filtering algorithm she had developed and stripped away the carrier wave, and what remained was breathtaking, and it was a clean, pulsing pattern that unmistakably contained structured information. Chris breathed the words, "Oh my God," and asked if she could decode it. Maya said she could try. Maya worked for another 6 hours straight applying various decoding methods, and the other scientists gathered around offering suggestions and running parallel analyses. And as dawn broke above ground 3 levels above their heads, Maya's algorithm finally produced results. The screen displayed numbers, a sequence of prime numbers followed by mathematical constants and the ratio between a circle's circumference and diameter, and the golden ratio and the mass ratio of fundamental particles. And it was a mathematical signature that said unmistakably that someone understood the universe and was intelligent and knew humanity was too. The lab fell completely silent, and 12 scientists stared at the screen, comprehending what they were seeing and realizing that humanity was not alone. And somewhere 400 light-years away, someone was calling out across the void, hoping for an answer. Dr. Bennett was called immediately, and he arrived within the hour and reviewed Maya's work and then made a phone call on a secure line. And Maya could not hear the conversation, but she saw his expression grow grave. When Bennett hung up, he turned to the team and said Protocol Alpha was now in effect, and nothing could leave this room and no communications were allowed outside official channels. And he looked at Maya and told her she had just made the most important discovery in human history. And now the really hard work was beginning. Maya called Daniel from a secure line, unable to tell him what she had found but needing to hear his voice. Maya said she could not talk about it, but something happened today and something big. Daniel asked if it was good big or bad big. Maya said it was world-changing big. Daniel was quiet for a moment and asked if she was safe. Maya said yes, but she might be late for a while and maybe days or weeks. Daniel said he understood and asked her to promise she would come home. Maya promised. As she hung up, Maya felt the weight of her discovery settling on her shoulders, and she had sought recognition and proof of her worth and validation of her brilliance, and now she had it. But it came with a burden she had not anticipated, because the fate of humanity's first contact with alien intelligence might rest, at least in part, on her work. She returned to her screen and looked at the signal pulsing with mathematical precision, and it was a message across the stars, and somewhere out there someone was waiting for a response, and Maya was going to help humanity give them one. Part 5. The following weeks were a complete blur of constant activity, and the facility went into full lockdown with additional security personnel arriving, and government officials in dark suits came and went, viewing the signal data with expressions of wonder and concern. And Maya barely saw daylight as she worked in shifts with the team to decode more of the message, and more importantly, to determine how humanity should respond. Peter argued during one heated discussion that they could not just send random signals back, because they did not know who these aliens were, or what they wanted, or what responding might invite. Alan countered that they also could not ignore the greatest discovery in human history, because the aliens had been trying to reach humanity for years, and someone had to answer. Maya listened to the debates but said little, because she was focused on the mathematics of the signal, and the elegant way information was encoded within it, and whoever had sent this was not only intelligent, but had a deep understanding of physics and mathematics that rivaled or exceeded humanity's own knowledge. Chris pulled Maya aside one evening and said she had been quiet, and asked what she was thinking. Maya said she was thinking they were approaching this wrong, and they were so focused on whether to respond that they were not asking what they could learn from the signal itself. And the aliens were not just saying hello, but showing humanity how they think and how they communicate and how they understand reality. Chris asked what she meant. Maya said she thought there was more hidden in the signal, and they had decoded the mathematical greeting, but there were still variations they had not accounted for, and she thought there was a deeper layer. Maya was right. Working alone during a graveyard shift, Maya applied a new decoding algorithm based on the signal's temporal variations, and what emerged made her hands shake uncontrollably. Coordinates appeared on her screen. Not just any coordinates, but a precise location in space relative to Earth, and more than that, there was a second set of coordinates that were closer, and much closer, and within the solar system itself. Maya called Dr. Bennett immediately, and protocol be damned. Bennett arrived at the lab within 30 minutes and reviewed her work and went pale. Maya said quietly that the aliens were not just sending a message from 400 light-years away, but they were already here or close enough to make a difference. Bennett said they needed to verify this immediately. Maya said she had verified it 3 times, and the coordinates pointed to a location just past the orbit of Neptune. Dr. Bennett made another secure call, and this one was longer and more urgent, and when he finished, he turned to Maya with an expression she could not quite read. Bennett said quietly that there was a ship, and their deep space monitoring system had detected an object 6 months ago, but they could not determine what it was, and the trajectory and speed were unusual, but they assumed it was a rogue asteroid or comet. Maya said it was not a comet. Bennett agreed and said no, it was not. Within hours, the facility was flooded with additional personnel, including military advisors and NASA scientists and diplomatic experts, and all of them were converging on the Deep Space Communications Lab, and Maya found herself briefing people far above her security clearance and explaining her findings to generals and administrators who listened with grave attention. One admiral asked how long until the object reached Earth. Chris answered by pulling up trajectory models and said if it maintained current velocity, approximately 2 years, but Dr. Williams' analysis suggested they could adjust speed if they wanted to. Maya added that the aliens had been observing humanity, and the signal was not just a greeting but an announcement, and they were telling humanity they were coming. The room erupted in heated debate, with some arguing for immediate military preparation, and others insisting on diplomatic outreach, and a few suggested keeping the information classified indefinitely and managing the revelation carefully to avoid global panic. Maya sat back, feeling overwhelmed by the implications of her discovery, because she had wanted to prove herself and show she was more than the prejudice that had defined her wedding day, and now she had done exactly that. But the weight of the achievement was crushing. Maya called Daniel during a brief break and spoke in vague terms about pressure and long hours. Daniel said she should come home even if it was just for a few hours because she needed rest. Maya said she could not come home yet. Daniel said she was going to collapse. Maya insisted she was fine. Daniel said he could hear in her voice that she was not fine. Maya wanted to tell Daniel everything about the signal and the coordinates and the ship moving through space toward humanity's doorstep, but the security protocols were absolute and she had signed agreements that carried criminal penalties for violation. Maya promised she would come home soon and said just a few more days. Daniel said he was proud of her, and whatever she was doing, he knew it was important, and he knew she was brilliant and he loved her. Those words carried Maya through the next 72 hours. The government made its decision and humanity would respond to the signal, but not with a military statement or an aggressive posture, but with a message of peace and scientific exchange, and Maya was chosen to help craft that response. Dr. Bennett explained that Maya understood their communication method better than anyone, and her algorithms had decoded their message, so she was the logical choice to help encode humanity's response. Working with a team of linguists and mathematicians and diplomats, Maya designed a response signal that echoed the structure of the original message, but included humanity's own mathematical signatures and scientific achievements, and a simple expression of peaceful intent. Alan asked during one session how they could convey peace and what was the universal symbol for peaceful intentions. Maya answered mathematics and explained they would show the aliens cooperation by sending back their prime number sequence with additions and extensions and demonstrate that humanity received their gift of knowledge and was adding to it, and that was collaboration, and that was peace. The response signal was crafted over 2 weeks with each component carefully considered and debated and refined, and when it was finally complete, Maya stood before the transmission array with her hand hovering over the activation control. Chris asked beside her if she was sure about this. Maya said no. She was not sure, but not being sure had never stopped humanity before. Maya pressed the control. The signal transmitted as a pulse of electromagnetic radiation, carrying humanity's first intentional message to an alien intelligence, and it would reach the location of the original transmission in 400 years, but the second transmission, aimed at the coordinates past Neptune, would arrive in a matter of months. Now they could only wait. Maya finally went home that night and found Daniel asleep on the couch with the television still on, playing some old movie neither of them had watched, and she curled up beside him, and he woke and pulled her close. Daniel murmured that she looked exhausted. Maya said she was. Daniel asked if she did it and whatever it was. Maya said, yeah, she did it. Daniel kissed her forehead and said good, and he knew she would. Maya fell asleep there on their old couch in their modest apartment while 400 light years away an alien civilization continued broadcasting their message, and somewhere past Neptune, a ship moved silently through the dark, carrying visitors whose intentions remained unknown. The world did not know yet about any of this, but it would soon enough. And Maya Williams, who was the bride who had been mocked and rejected and judged unworthy by people who could not see past her skin, had become the architect of humanity's first conversation with the stars, and that meant something even if she could not yet fully understand what. Part 6. 2 months passed after sending the response signal, and the government maintained strict secrecy about the alien signal and the approaching vessel, and Maya returned to a modified version of her normal life, while still working on the project, but with slightly more reasonable hours, and she and Daniel settled into a routine, though she carried the weight of knowledge he could not share. Then on a Tuesday morning, everything changed completely. Maya was at the facility when alarms began blaring throughout the building, and she rushed to the communications lab to find the team in complete chaos with every screen filled with new incoming data. Maya demanded to know what was happening. Chris turned to her with his face flushed with excitement and fear at the same time, and said they responded, and the ship had responded to humanity's message. On the main display, a new signal pattern emerged. That was far more complex than the original message, and it took Maya's breath away, because the aliens had received humanity's response and were answering back with detailed information and schematics and coordinates for a meeting and something else, a timeline. Peter said with his voice shaking that the aliens wanted to make direct contact and they wanted to do it in 3 weeks. Maya stared at the data and said 3 weeks was impossible, and humanity was not ready, and the world was not ready. Chris said the aliens were not giving humanity a choice because the ship was accelerating, and they had provided coordinates for a rendezvous point just outside the orbit of the moon. Dr. Bennett entered the lab, followed by a woman Maya did not recognize, and she was in her 50s wearing a formal suit and carried herself with unmistakable authority. Bennett introduced the woman as Secretary Ellen Murphy and said she was coordinating the government's response to the situation. Secretary Murphy extended her hand to Maya and said she understood Maya was instrumental in decoding both the original signal and the recent response. Maya said she had help and the whole team worked on it. Secretary Murphy said yes, but Maya made the initial breakthrough, which was why she was there to discuss Maya's role in what came next. They moved to a conference room, and Secretary Murphy laid out the situation with startling clarity. Murphy said the president had decided they could not keep this secret any longer, and in 3 days they would be making a public announcement, and the world would learn that humanity was not alone, and that first contact was imminent, and it would be the most significant moment in human history. Maya repeated the words 3 days, and her mind was reeling. Murphy explained that the announcement would be made by a team of scientists who worked on the project, and she said they would like Maya to be part of that team. Maya felt the room tilt and asked why her. Murphy said Maya's contributions had been essential, and more than that, Maya represented something important, and this discovery belonged to all of humanity, not just to one demographic, and having Maya as a visible part of this effort sent a message about who humanity was as a species. Maya's jaw tightened and she said, "So they wanted her there because she was black." Secretary Murphy met Maya's gaze steadily and said she wanted Maya there because she was brilliant and because she had earned it. And yes, because representation mattered, and not just for appearance sake, but because the world needed to see that this achievement came from diverse minds working together. And she asked if that was a problem. Maya thought about the wedding, and about the Carter family's contempt, and about every microaggression and obstacle she had faced, and then she thought about the signal, and about the ship approaching from the darkness, and about the proof that humanity was just one small part of a much larger universe. Maya said finally that no, it was not a problem. Murphy said good, because in 3 days Maya's life was going to change in ways she could not imagine. Secretary Murphy was not exaggerating at all. The announcement was made from the White House and broadcast globally, and the president spoke first with his words carefully chosen to inspire rather than frighten. And then the scientific team presented the evidence, including the signal and the decoding process and the response and the approaching ship. Maya stood among 6 other scientists, feeling the weight of cameras focused on her, and knowing that billions of people around the world were watching. And when it was her turn to speak, she explained the mathematical structure of the signal and translated complex science into terms the public could understand. Maya said what they were seeing was not just proof of alien intelligence, but proof that intelligence, wherever it emerged, sought connection. And across 400 light years and countless years of evolution, they reached out to say humanity was not alone, and humanity answered back. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming, and social media exploded with debate and fear and excitement and wonder, and news channels ran 24-hour coverage, and governments worldwide scrambled to issue statements, and religious leaders grappled with theological implications, and scientists who had spent careers searching for alien life celebrated validation of their work. And Maya Williams, who was the researcher who had been fighting for recognition just months earlier, became one of the most famous people on Earth. Her phone rang constantly with interview requests flooding in, and reporters camped outside her apartment building, and Daniel had to take leave from work just to manage the chaos. Daniel said while watching news coverage of Maya's statement being replayed for the 100th time that this was insane, and she was everywhere. Maya said she knew and she could not process it. Daniel asked how she felt. Maya thought about the question carefully and said she felt terrified and excited and overwhelmed and like she was living someone else's life. Her phone buzzed again and she glanced at it and froze. Daniel asked what was wrong after seeing her expression. Maya said it was his mother. They stared at the phone for a moment and then Maya answered. Maya said hello, Mrs. Carter. Patricia's voice was strange and tight with emotions Maya could not identify, and she said Maya's name and then said she had been watching the news. Maya said everyone had been watching. Patricia said she did not know about Maya's work or about what she was doing, and she had no idea. Maya waited and said nothing. Patricia said that she and Richard would like to talk to Maya and Daniel and asked if they would be willing to come to dinner. Maya asked if Patricia was serious. Patricia said she knew they had a lot to make up for and she knew an invitation to dinner did not fix anything, but she was asking and said, "Please." Maya looked at Daniel and covered the phone and told him his mother wanted them to come to dinner. Daniel asked if Patricia meant both of them. Maya said yes, both of them. Daniel's expression was unreadable, and then he shook his head and told Maya to say they would think about it. Maya relayed the message and ended the call, and they sat in silence for a moment. Daniel said bitterly that they only cared now because Maya was famous and because she was on television and because the whole world knew her name, and he asked where they were when Maya needed support and where they were at the wedding. Maya said she knew. Daniel asked why she did not just say no. Maya stood and walked to the window, looking out at the reporters still lingering on the street below, and said she was tired of fighting, and tired of proving herself, and tired of carrying anger. And maybe they were reaching out for the wrong reasons, and maybe they would never truly change, but she needed to know. And she needed to give them one chance to show they were capable of being better. Daniel asked what if they were not capable of change. Maya said then at least she would know she tried. Daniel came to stand beside her and took her hand and said, "Okay." They would go, but the first sign of disrespect, or the first insult, or the first indication that they had not changed, and they would leave immediately. Maya agreed. What they did not know was that the dinner invitation was just the beginning, and the Carter family was about to face a reckoning of their own, delivered not by Maya or Daniel, but by a phone call that would strip away their prejudice and force them to confront exactly who they had rejected. And that call was coming sooner than anyone expected. Part 7. The dinner was scheduled for Friday evening, which was 4 days after the public announcement, and Maya spent those days in a whirlwind of activity with briefings and government officials and coordination meetings about the upcoming contact, event and media management, and she barely had time to think about the Carter family, which was perhaps a blessing. Friday arrived too quickly, and Maya stood before her closet staring at her clothes with unusual uncertainty. Maya asked Daniel what she should wear to dinner with people who hated her. Daniel came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist and said they did not hate her. Maya said they did hate her. Daniel said maybe they had learned something, Maya said, or maybe they just wanted to be associated with someone famous. She chose a simple dress that was elegant but not flashy, because she was not there to impress them, but only to give them a chance and nothing more. The drive to the Carter house took 30 minutes, and it was a beautiful home in an affluent neighborhood, and the kind of place Daniel had grown up in, surrounded by wealth and privilege, and Maya had seen it only once before when Daniel had insisted on introducing her to his parents before the wedding, and that meeting had lasted less than 15 minutes before Patricia claimed a headache and disappeared upstairs. Richard answered the door, and he looked older than Maya remembered, with whiter hair and a more stooped posture, and he stared at Maya for a long moment, and she saw something in his eyes that might have been shame. Richard said Maya's name and Daniel's name, and told them to please come in. The house was immaculate and decorated with expensive taste and military precision, and photos lined the hallway, mostly of Daniel and Gregory growing up with their achievements captured in frames, and Maya noticed there were no photos from the wedding. Patricia emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron and a nervous smile and said dinner was almost ready, and asked them to please sit down, and asked if she could get them something to drink. The forced pleasantry was unsettling, and Maya had expected coldness or contempt or awkward silence, but this anxious hospitality was somehow worse. They gathered in the dining room, and Gregory and his wife had not been invited, which Maya found telling because this was just the four of them forcing a conversation that should have happened months ago. Patricia served chicken and roasted vegetables, and a salad, and the food was good, but Maya barely tasted it because the tension in the room was suffocating. Richard said after a few minutes of painful silence that Maya had quite a week. Maya said, "Yes, sir." Richard said the whole world was talking about the discovery and about her work. Maya set down her fork and said she appreciated the dinner invitation, but they should not pretend this was just a casual meal because they had ignored her for months and treated their wedding like a funeral, and now suddenly they wanted to talk, so they should talk and say what they needed to say. Patricia flinched at the directness, and Richard's jaw tightened, but neither of them looked away. Richard said finally that Maya was right, and they had behaved shamefully, and there was no excuse for how they treated her, or how they treated Daniel, and they were wrong. Maya asked wrong about what specifically. Richard said about Maya and about judging her before they knew her, and about letting their own prejudices dictate their behavior toward their son's wife. Maya waited with her expression neutral and asked, what changed, and was it the fact that she was on television now? Or the fact that she was suddenly respectable because she was famous? Patricia said with her voice breaking slightly that no. That was not what changed, and what changed was that they watched Maya on that broadcast explaining science they could not understand and representing their entire species. And they realized something and realized Maya was exactly who Daniel said she was, and brilliant and strong and worthy of respect, and they had been too blind to see it. Maya corrected sharply and said they had been too racist to see it and they should use the right word. The word hung in the air like a bomb, and Patricia's face went red and Richard looked down at his plate, but neither of them argued. Richard said quietly that yes, they had been racist and they judged Maya by the color of her skin and nothing else. And they assumed things about her and about her background and about her worth, and they were wrong and they were ashamed. Daniel, who had been silent until now, leaned forward and said he had been calling them for months, and every time they found an excuse to get off the phone, and every family event they made it clear Maya was not welcome, and he asked where was this shame then? Richard said he knew and they had failed, both of them. Daniel asked why now and why this sudden change of heart. Before Richard could answer, his phone rang, and he glanced at it with his expression changing from discomfort to confusion to something approaching fear. Richard said he needed to take this call and stood abruptly and moved to the other room. They could hear his voice muffled through the wall, but the tone was clear with surprise and concern and growing distress, and when he returned a few minutes later, his face was ashen. Richard sank back into his chair and said that was Admiral Peterson. Patricia asked with alarm in her voice what was wrong. Richard looked at Maya, and in his eyes she saw something close to awe. Richard said slowly that the aliens had sent another message and a specific request about the contact event, and they wanted to meet with the scientists who decoded their signal, and they had asked for Maya by name. The room went completely silent. Daniel said what? Richard explained that the message included credentials and qualifications, and a description of the work done to decode their signal, and the aliens had been monitoring humanity's broadcasts and learning about humans, and they specifically requested that Dr. Maya Williams be part of the contact team, and not just any scientist, but Maya specifically. Maya felt the blood drain from her face and said that was impossible. Richard said Admiral Peterson confirmed it and the message was clear, and they wanted to meet the minds that understood their message, and Maya was at the top of that list. Patricia had gone pale and asked if Maya was going to meet them in person. Maya said she did not know, and this was the first she was hearing about it. Richard stood and walked to Maya's chair, and then slowly he knelt beside it, looking up at her, and it was a gesture of supplication and of respect, and so out of character for the stern military man that Maya could barely process what was happening. Richard said Maya's name with his voice thick with emotion, and said he had rejected her and treated her as if she were nothing, and now he learned that aliens and beings from another world with intelligence beyond human comprehension had chosen Maya as one of the first humans they wanted to meet, and he asked if she understood what that meant. Maya said quietly that it meant she did her job. Richard said it meant Maya was extraordinary and he was too much of a fool to see it, and too much of a bigot to recognize what his son had recognized the moment he met Maya. Tears were streaming down Patricia's face, and she said they were so sorry and so incredibly sorry, and they did not deserve Maya's forgiveness. But she should please know that they saw her now, and they finally saw her. Maya looked at Daniel, whose own eyes were wet, and she thought about the wedding and about the months of silence and about the pain of being judged unworthy. And she thought about how hard she had fought to prove herself not to them, but to the world. And now the universe itself had validated her worth. Maya said honestly that she did not know if she could forgive them, and not yet, and maybe not ever, because what they did hurt her deeply, and it hurt Daniel, and they did not get to erase that just because circumstances had changed. Richard said they understood. Maya continued and said, but she believed people could grow, and she had to believe that, because if she did not, then what hope was there for any of them? And so she would give them a chance, and not for them, but for Daniel, and for the possibility that maybe they could learn to be better. Richard took Maya's hand and pressed it to his forehead, in a gesture that looked almost like prayer, and said, "Thank you." The dinner continued, but everything had changed, and the conversation became real and genuine, as Richard and Patricia asked questions about Maya's work and her life and her dreams, and they listened when she spoke, and truly listened and engaged with her as a person, rather than a problem to be solved. Later, as Maya and Daniel drove home, she stared out the window at the stars. Maya asked if Daniel thought they meant it and if his parents were sincere. Daniel said he thought they were trying, and whether that was enough he did not know. Maya said the aliens wanted to meet her specifically and said her name. Daniel said he knew. Maya said she was terrified. Daniel reached over and took her hand and said Maya had been preparing for this her whole life, and every obstacle and every challenge, and every time someone told her she was not enough, had led here and she was ready. Maya asked what if she was not ready. Daniel said then she would figure it out because that was what she did, and she faced impossible situations and made them possible. Maya smiled in the darkness and asked when Daniel became so wise. Daniel said, he married a genius and some of it must have rubbed off on him. 2 weeks later, Maya Williams would board a shuttle to the International Space Station where she would wait for a ship to arrive from beyond the stars, and she would be part of the first human delegation to meet an alien. Part 8. The International Space Station had never held such importance in all its years of operation, and for weeks it had been modified and prepared for the historic event, with sections of the station transformed into a meeting space suitable for humanity's first face-to-face encounter with alien intelligence. Maya floated through the station's corridors, still adjusting to the sensation of microgravity, and she was part of a 7-person delegation that included 3 scientists and 2 diplomats and 2 military advisors, and all of them were chosen to represent humanity in this unprecedented moment. Chris Harrison floated beside Maya, grinning despite his obvious nervousness, and said he still could not believe they were actually doing this. Maya admitted that neither could she. Through the observation window, Earth hung below them like a beautiful blue marble suspended in the velvet darkness, and somewhere down there, 8 billion people waited and watched broadcasts from the station and held their collective breath. And somewhere beyond the moon's orbit, a ship approached. Commander Lisa Park announced over the station's intercom that the alien vessel was entering visual range, and all personnel should report to the observation deck. The delegation gathered at the largest viewport with cameras focused on them and on the space beyond, and Maya's heart hammered as she stared into the darkness, searching for any sign of the approaching vessel. Then she saw it. The ship was unlike anything human engineers had ever conceived, and it seemed to be made of a material that shifted and flowed and reflected starlight in impossible ways, and the structure was both organic and geometric, as if it had been grown rather than built, and it was massive and easily 3 times the size of the space station, yet moved with graceful precision. Chris whispered, "Oh my God." The ship slowed and then stopped relative to the station, maintaining a respectful distance, and for several minutes nothing happened, and the 2 vessels hung in space with humanity, and the unknown separated by a few hundred meters, and the vast gulf of evolutionary history. Then a smaller craft detached from the main ship. It was elegant and simple, and a smooth ovoid that glided toward the station with no visible means of propulsion, and as it approached the docking port, Maya felt her breath catch, because this was it, and the moment everything changed. The docking procedure took 20 minutes with automated systems on both sides communicating in mathematical languages that transcended species, and when the seals engaged and pressurization was confirmed, Commander Park turned to the delegation. Park asked if they were ready. No one was ready, because how could anyone be ready for this, but Maya nodded and the others followed her lead. The airlock opened. 3 beings floated through. They were humanoid in basic structure with bilateral symmetry, and 2 arms and 2 legs and a central torso and a head. But the similarities ended there, and their skin was a deep iridescent blue that seemed to shift in the station's lighting, and their eyes were large and multifaceted and reflected like prisms, and they had no visible hair, and their features were both alien and somehow beautiful and elegant in their difference. They wore clothing of sorts and fitted garments that appeared to be made from the same shifting material as their ship, and when they moved with a grace that suggested they were far more comfortable in microgravity than any human could ever be. The lead being raised what Maya assumed was a hand with fingers that were longer and more numerous than human digits. Then it spoke. The voice was unlike anything Maya had heard, and harmonious and layered, as if multiple tones were speaking simultaneously. But through the translation device the aliens had provided in advance, the words came through clearly. The aliens said they greeted the humans of Earth, and they were the Thessian unity, and they had traveled far to meet the minds that heard their call. The diplomats had prepared speeches and carefully worded greetings that had been debated and revised by committees, but in the moment formal words seemed inadequate. Maya found herself floating forward before she consciously decided to move. Maya said they greeted the Thessian unity, and she was Dr. Maya Williams, and on behalf of humanity, she thanked them for reaching out and for showing humanity that they were not alone. The lead Thessian tilted its head in a gesture that seemed to convey curiosity, and said she was the one who decoded their mathematical message. Maya said she was part of the team. Yes. The Thessian said her mind worked in interesting patterns, and they had observed humanity's broadcasts and studied her methods. And she approached the problem from an unexpected angle, and this was why they asked for her specifically. Maya said they honored her. The Thessian said they honored intelligence wherever it emerged, and humanity had only recently achieved technological sophistication, yet showed remarkable promise, and Maya represented something important. Maya asked what the Thessian meant. The Thessian made a gesture with its multiple fingers and something that might have been the equivalent of a smile, and said they had been observing Earth for some time, and learning human languages and understanding human cultures, and they knew that humanity struggled with diversity and divided themselves over superficial differences in appearance. Maya felt her throat tighten because even aliens could see it. The Thessian continued and said, yet Maya stood here having overcome prejudice and doubt to achieve something remarkable, and she was proof that intelligence and worth were not determined by arbitrary physical characteristics, and this was a lesson humanity must learn if they were to join the greater community of civilized worlds. The weight of those words settled over the delegation, and the Thessian was not just making first contact but evaluating humanity and judging whether Earth's species was ready to take its place among the stars. Maya said carefully that humanity had much to learn as individuals and as a species. The Thessian said yes, but humanity was learning, and that was what mattered, and progress, not perfection. The meeting continued for hours, and the Thessians shared information about their civilization and their history and the broader community of intelligent species that existed throughout the galaxy, and they spoke of technologies humanity had yet to imagine, and of worlds beyond counting, and of possibilities that made the human delegation weep with wonder. But they also spoke of responsibility, and of the dangers that came with advanced technology, and of species that had destroyed themselves through warfare or greed or environmental collapse, and of the careful balance required to join the interstellar community without losing what made each species unique. The lead Thessian explained that they did not demand humanity change, but only asked that humanity grow and learn to value intelligence and consciousness in all its forms, and overcome the small prejudices that held them back from greatness. The meeting drew to a close, the Thessian turned to Maya one final time. The Thessian said Maya would be remembered, and not just for decoding their message, but for what she represented. And she had faced rejection and prejudice, yet she persevered and proved her worth not through anger, but through excellence, and that was the path humanity must follow. Maya felt tears floating away from her eyes in the zero gravity and asked if they would see each other again. The Thessian said yes, and this was not a farewell, but a beginning, and they would return, bringing others of the unity. And perhaps in time, some humans would visit their worlds, and the universe was vast, but it was also connected, and no species should face it alone. The Thessians departed with their shuttle gliding back to the massive ship, and the delegation watched as the vessel began to move and accelerate to speeds that defied human physics and disappear into the depths of space. Commander Park broke the silence and said they just made first contact with an alien species. Chris said with his voice shaky with emotion that, yeah, they really did. Maya floated to the observation window staring at Earth below, and somewhere down there Daniel was watching and waiting for her to come home. And somewhere down there the Carter family was seeing the broadcast and watching Maya represent humanity to beings from beyond the stars. Maya thought about the wedding and about Patricia's cold face and Richard's contempt, and she thought about every obstacle she had faced and every time she had been judged unworthy because of her skin color. And she realized that none of it mattered anymore. And not because she had proven them wrong, though she had, but because the universe was so much bigger than their small prejudices, and because intelligence and worth transcended skin color and planetary origin and any other arbitrary division. The Thessians had chosen her not despite her struggles, but because of them, and because she represented the possibility of growth, and of overcoming prejudice, and of becoming something greater than the sum of human fears. 2 weeks later, Maya returned to Earth, and the landing was broadcast globally with thousands of people gathered at the Space Center to welcome the delegation home. And as Maya descended the shuttle stairs with her legs shaky from readjustment to gravity, she saw Daniel waiting at the bottom. She ran to him and he caught her and lifted her off the ground. Daniel said with his voice breaking that she did it and she actually did it. Maya corrected him and said they did it, and she could not have done any of this without him. Behind the barriers, she saw Richard and Patricia Carter standing with the crowd, and they were not at the front and not demanding attention, but simply stood there. And when Maya met Richard's eyes, she saw him mouth,